Africa is home to some of the world's richest natural resources. Sitting on a treasure trove of untapped potential, Africa has over 30% of the world's mineral reserves. No wonder Africa has been seen as the future of global supply chains.
But it's not just about the minerals. Africa's fertile land makes it the perfect place to cultivate a variety of crops, everything from cocoa, coffee and tea to cassava, maize and legumes. It's a market that feeds billions and offers huge growth potential for investors looking at the future of food security and agribusiness. By the way, my name is Hawa and I represent the western part of Africa.
And that's just the start. Africa's energy sector is rapidly evolving with abundant natural resources like solar, wind, and hydropower. The continent is positioned to become a global leader in renewable energy. Countries like South Africa, Egypt, and Kenya are already making significant strides towards energy independence and sustainability.
Don't even get me started about what makes Africa stand out. Of course, it's its people, the young, dynamic, and entrepreneurial spirit that is fueling the rise of technology and innovation. We are seeing incredible growth in sectors like fintech, e-commerce, and mobile technology. The continent's digital transformation is creating new opportunities for businesses and investors, and the pace is only accelerating.
Discussing trends, challenges, and opportunities available in Africa is what we discuss on Invest Africa Podcast.
Invest Africa Podcast.
You are Africans. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans. Yeah. We are Africans. I can't hear you. We are Africans. Louder. We are Africans. Come on, Africans.
So whether you are a seasoned investor or someone looking to explore the emerging markets, the Invest Africa podcast is here to help you navigate this exciting landscape. Join us as we take you on a journey through Africa's abundant resources, thriving industries, and the game-changing investments that are shaping the future of the continent.
The Invest Africa podcast, shaping Africa's investment landscape.
Hey there, welcome to another enlightening and vital episode of the Invest Africa Group podcast, the show where we connect the dot between Africa's stories, its struggles, and its shining possibilities. I'm your host, Mubarak Abimbola, and today we're staring down a global political hurricane. Okay, we are talking about the millions of sons and daughters of Africa who are right now generating billions in economic power, while simultaneously being painted as the world's most convenient political scapegoat. It's a crucial contradiction we must dissect. And thankfully, I don't have to tackle this immense topic alone. I have my co-pilot whose insight is sharper than any boardroom strategy. I'm talking about the incomparable Hawa. Hi, Hawa.
Hi, Mubarak. Thank you for that generous introduction. Hi guys, my name is Hawa and it's good to be here again. I'm always thrilled to be here actually, bringing you bold and deep conversations that shape the African narrative. If you haven't tuned into this space before, please pause this one, go check out our other episodes, right? It gives vital context to today's topic. Yeah, like Mubarak said, today we're not just discussing policy, we're examining a global economic and political injustice. Yeah, we're talking about immigration crossroads. How African migrants became political scapegoats abroad. This is a conversation about how a demographic that sent billions in remittances and represents the continent's finest human capital is being systematically demonized in Europe, the US, and even beyond. It's an urgent dive into politics that directly impacts Africa's future prosperity.
Now listen, this is not just about border control or visa applications, yeah? I mean, this is about a phenomenon where people, Africans like you and myself, have been strategically transformed. We've become simple, easily digestible symbols in complex political stories. We are the talking points that drive voter turnout, and most disturbingly, we are cast as the convenient villains in political dramas within right, blamed for everything, and from inflation and public health crises to the erosion of cultural identity. It is the ultimate act of political deflection, allowing host nations to avoid confronting their own internal economic failures. That's the lens through which we must examine this problem today.
And we are going all in, guys. Our journey today will be comprehensive. We'll be cutting through the rhetoric with data, history, and real policy analysis. We'll start by examining the recent rise of right-wing anti-immigrant narratives in Europe elections, then pivot to the painful reality of who is being blamed and why across the UK, France, Italy, and the US, and the tragedy of xenophobia in South Africa. We'll then zoom in on the economic consequences, how this toxic political climate impacts the lifeblood of our continent, right? And we'll close by highlighting the crucial role of diaspora media and advocates who are fighting to reclaim and redefine the narrative.
That's right. Don't think we forgot to update you on the latest investment trends across the continent. So guys, stick with us, because by the end of this conversation, you not only have a deeper, fact-based understanding of the immigration crossroads, you will truly feel the human, economic, and political stakes for Africa. And as always, want to hear your takes on this topic, do well to drop a comment on our social media platforms using the hashtag #InvestAfricaGroupPodcast, and we'll take the conversation from there. Let's look at the politics of blame. Where do we begin?
Okay, if we look at it critically, there's a fundamental political mechanism at play here: scapegoating, right? Scapegoating at its core is the oldest trick in the political playbook, the strategy of calculated deflection. When leaders or governing parties are unable to deliver on core promises, when they can't fix the economy, when unemployment figures soar, when public services are strained, right, they must politically find an immediate visible entity to absorb the public's anger. In the past decade, and particularly in the election cycles of 2023 and 2024, African migrants have been strategically positioned as the perfect target.
I agree with you. This is a mechanism that systematically replaces complex economic reality with a simple, convenient villain. For instance, the narrative propagated by rising right-wing populism from Italy's Fratelli d'Italia to Germany's AfD is that migrants are an economic drain. Yet, as reported in a 2022 analysis on migration in South Africa, research consistently disproves this claim, showing that migrants are often net contributors, sometimes even creating the local jobs with systemic socio-economic problems rooted instead in poor governance and corruption.
And don't let get it wrong here, this is not an accident of rhetoric. It's a deliberate political strategy. Whether it's in Tunisia, France, South Africa, or Italy, we've seen the same storyline repeated. There's a talk of, foreigners are taking our jobs, foreigners are increasing crime, foreigners are changing our culture, right? But when you look at the data, it really supports those claims. For example, in 2023, the Martin Center for European Studies published a report showing that only 17% of immigrants entering the EU that year came from Africa, and mostly were for, legal purposes, like for work or for study. Yet, in public debates, you'd think half of Europe was being invaded.
And even within Africa, the pattern repeats. The Afrobarometer survey of 2024 found out that 47% of Africans have considered emigrating, but only 4% have actually left their countries. So the so-called mass exodus is largely imagined, but fear of it drives real hostility. What's even more fascinating, though, is how this fear gets politicized. Remember President Kais Saied of Tunisia in 2023? He publicly claimed that sub-Saharan immigration was part of a plot to change Tunisia's demography. Overnight, sub-Saharan Africans were attacked in the street. Landlords evicted tenants. Students fled. And that's how fast rhetoric turns into reality.
The most insidious application of this scapegoat to Mubarak revolves around the issue of crime. When you listen to the rhetoric, particularly in the lead up to elections, African migrants are frequently connected to rising crime rates. However, when you cut through the political noise and look at the data, the picture is often much different. Multiple studies in Europe have repeatedly failed to show a causal link between rising immigration and an increase in overall violent crime rates. In fact, research frequently indicates that first-generation immigrants often exhibit lower crime rates than native-born population.
And this is not really about winning seats, if you ask me. It's about controlling the policy agenda. The reality is that perception is being weaponized as policy. In countries like Poland, you have seen far-right activists leveraging isolated tragic criminal incidents to spread misinformation, despite experts noting that the actual number of irregular entries remain relatively low. Sadly, the same tactic shows up in Africa too. So the questions we're asking now is, why does scapegoating migrants work politically? And what does it reveal about our societies?
Okay, so let's actually ground this conversation with some data. According to the International Organization for Migration, the IOM, by 2024, about 41 million Africans were living outside their country of origin. But here's the twist. More than half of them, we're talking about 21 million now, are still living within Africa. That means migration is mostly internal, right? Africans moving from Nigeria to Ghana, from Mali to Cote d'Ivoire, from Sudan to Egypt. Yet, our media coverage mostly focuses on those going to Europe, the boats, the desert, the tragedies. I mean, even for those, migrating themselves, they really post themselves, going to within African countries.
One thing I love about data is that it shows the true state of things. I mean, before now, one would have imagined that, many Africans move abroad. And when they move abroad, the first thing that comes to your mind is they're moving to the West, going to Europe, going to America. But it's so shocking that 41 million Africans live outside their country of origin, and 21 million or more than that live within Africa. That's shocking. The figures you cite dismantle the sensational narrative. I mean, we are not looking at a mass exodus towards Europe. We are witnessing an era of intra-African mobility, an engine of regional development that is deliberately ignored, by Western media and populist politicians. The illegal invasion rhetoric is designed to obscure three key facts about human movement, which is legitimacy, necessity, and economic contribution. Then I want to break it down by motivation. The human element, which is overwhelmingly legitimate. About 45% go for family reasons, 25% go for work, and 20% for education.
You see right there, that means 90% of movement is motivated by family, employment, or academic necessity. The political focus on the small fraction of irregular arrivals is a tactical distraction. And what is buried under that distraction is the economic benefit of this internal movement. We are seeing compelling evidence that intra-African migration is a net economic positive impact for destination countries. Analysis by institutions like the African Development Bank shows that a 1% increase in the number of immigrants in a destination country can lead to an increase in manufacturing value added by up to 0.43% in that local economy.
Exactly my point, Awa. In key regional blocs like ECOWAS in West Africa and SADC in Southern Africa, migrant remittances and labor fuel commerce, particularly in agriculture and informal trade, which is the fundamental process of structural economic transformation. And the tragedy is that while politicians debate numbers, real people are dying. In December 2024, a boat carrying about 70 migrants from Mali sank off the Canary Island. Only 11 survived. And what did headlines say the next day? Illegal migrants risked their lives? No. Instead, they came up with headlines like, people desperate for opportunity.
And that framing actually matters. It is everything. Once you define someone as illegal, it's easier to strip away their humanity. You no longer think about their dreams, you're focusing on just that document. The images of boats and desert crossings serve an essential function for rising populist and far-right parties. They simplify a complex, multi-decade failure of development and governance into a single visceral threat. This focus allows politicians to push border security and externalization, like the deal struck with North African states as a singular policy achievement.
And that's the first layer of scapegoating. Turning individuals into issues. The political reward for stopping 1,000 people at sea is far greater than the political reward for facilitating the smooth movement of 21 million people who are failing African economies. That is the core of the politics of blame. They ignore the beneficial majority, to demonize the struggling minority. And in doing so, they not only demonize the migrant, but they strategically, obscure the enormous economic potential of a truly integrated African continent.
Umbarak, I was speaking to a friend, a Ghanaian studying in Japan. He said something that stuck with me. He said, and I quote, if I try to remember correctly, I left home thinking I would find freedom, but I found fear. That was such a simple statement, but it sums up, the migrant's experience. You're being both visible and invisible at once. And it leads me to ask you this. Did history lay the foundation for all this, and how?
That's a critical question, Awa. To understand the present politics of blame, we must examine the historical ledger. The current narratives of African migration are fundamentally shaped by the extractive and destructive policies of European colonialism. This is not just history, It is the blueprint for today's control mechanisms. The lines drawn on the map weren't arbitrary. They were tools of economic engineering. European colonial powers carved up the continent at the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference, establishing borders, the very sovereign frontiers now zealously guarded, that ignored ethnic, linguistic, and established trade routes.
Absolutely, you're right. Because this withdrawing immediately forced, migration into new unnatural patterns designed solely to serve colonial industrial goals, right? Our migrants were driven to specific economic enclaves like mines, cash crop plantations, and infrastructure projects, right? And this was through direct taxation policies that could only be paid in colonial currency acquired by working for the European administration. In Southern Africa, the vast network of labor migration into the South African mines from countries like Mozambique and Lesotho was not organic. It was an artificial constructed supply chain of cheap labor.
Railroads and roads were built to move resources from the interior to the coastal port for export to Europe, not to facilitate intra-Africa connectivity. This infrastructure directly shaped the migration corridors we see today, forcing people into routes of economic subservience. This historical context is vital because it exposes the profound hypocrisy in today's rhetoric. When European politicians decry uncontrolled mass migration from Africa, they're literally ignoring the fact that they created the very conditions for that movement.
Absolutely. And the impact didn't end with independence. the core political issue remains that African mobility is still viewed through a lens of external control. After independence, those same powers imposed immigration laws that favored former colonial subjects, but later reversed them when migration numbers grew. Take the UK for instance. The Commonwealth Immigrant Act of 1962 was the first to restrict migration from former colonies, including African nations.
Now, today's policies of border externalization, like the EU funding agreement with countries such as Libya, Tunisia, and Morocco, to intercept and detain migrants, are nothing less than a neo-colonial practice. Instead of the colonial state managing the labor flow, it is the EU paying African states to act as border guards. I mean, that's very ironic, right? They built railway, plantations, and industries using African labor. But decades later, they tell those same descendants, stay where you are, we don't want you.
And that contradiction fuels the sentiment. Politicians know how to exploit that resentment, They make migration sound like invasion rather than continuity. And it's not just Europe. In Libya, for example, during Gaddafi's era, talk about the 1970s to 2000s, migrants from sub-Saharan Africa were welcomed as part of Pan-African unity. But after 2011, when Libya collapsed, militias began targeting those same migrants. They were accused of being mercenaries in quotes.
I mean, it's a chilling pattern. When times are good, migrants are brothers. When times are bad, they are burdens. And that's how scapegoating works. It rises with economic hardship, unemployment, or political failure. People want someone to blame. And migrants are convenient because they can't vote, they can't fight back, and often they can't even speak the local language.
That's right. A report by the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights in 2023, titled Being Black in the EU, revealed that 77% of people of African descent experienced discrimination within 5 years. That's millions of stories of exclusion, people being denied housing, jobs, or simple safety because of their skin color. And yet, these same migrants fill Europe's labor gaps. They work in agriculture, nursing, construction, logistics, right? The economies rely on them, so they are simultaneously needed and hated.
I mean, that's the immigrant paradox, and it is global. Well, whether from the streets of Johannesburg to Paris to Lagos or down to Rome, migrants are both builders and scapegoats. But I want our listeners to sit with a question, okay, before we move on to the next conversation. If migration is as natural as breathing, why do we still treat movers as threat? Because that will lead us to the core conversation we're about to have next. Europe and North Africa, gateways, politics, and the human stories. We're entering the heart of our journey because Europe and North Africa, they are not just close-up based on landmark. They are the gateway to migration. It is the political battlegrounds, okay, where African migrants are mostly visible, scapegoated. Let me begin by moving through Italy, Tunisia, Spain, or Mediterranean route and examine how rhetorics, policies, and life experience intersect. Okay, I think Awa and I would also, alternate between macro and micro national policies, EU dynamics, but also personal stories and ground realities. But to begin with, let's go to Italy. I mean, many of us have had so many stories about Italy, right?
That's right. Italy often stands at the front line of Europe's migration debate, yeah? Let me throw a few numbers at you to set the stage, guys. In 2023, Italy recorded 155,000 over that year migrant arrivals by sea. A sharp jump from 103,000 in 2022. In 2023, First asylum applicants jumped 69%, to about 131,000, with many from Egypt, Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc. As of January 2024, Italy hosts over 3 million non-EU citizens legally residing in the country. Meanwhile, Italy's foreign citizens are estimated at over 5 million, about 8.9% of the population, excluding naturalized individuals.
I mean, those are big numbers. But numbers alone don't tell the full story, especially in Italy, where policies and politics tug migrants in contradictory directions. One paradox: farmers, hospitality businesses, caregiving sectors rely heavily on migrant labor. Yet, migrants are often framed as illegals or burdens. Some are stuck in limbo, unable to move, and also unable to fully integrate.
That's such a sad reality, right? The migration policy article describes involuntary immobility, right, where migrants who intended to continue deeper into Europe end up stuck in Italy because of tighter asylum or transit rules. Let me tell you a story that captures this tension. A young African named Samuel arrived in Sicily after a dangerous sea crossing. He hoped to move north, but his papers were delayed. He ended up doing backbreaking work in farms, being underpaid, exploited, and so many very demanding things happened to him. Locals even sometimes berated him for stealing jobs, right? He worried constantly. He had worries like, will the police raid? Will he be deported? Will he have enough money to survive? And issues like that. These are real stories of what these numbers might actually look like.
Politically, the rhetoric has hardened. Government call for stricter controls, faster deportations, border wars, pushbacks, and all of that. But meanwhile, municipalities and NGOs talks of inclusion and human rights. Also, behind the scenes, Italy signs migration deals with Niger Republic, Libya, and Tunisia to curb flows, pushing enforcement outward. And those deals come with moral hazards. For example, if Tunisia is considered a safe third country, Italy may send migrants back there. But Tunisia has documented abuses.
So in short, Italy needs migrants, borrows them, then fears them. That contradiction is at the core of scapegoating. Now let's shift east to Tunisia, which has transformed from transit route to hostile terrain for migrants. Tunisia is a key focal point, strategically situated between sub-Saharan Africa and Europe. It's become a launch pad and a bottleneck. According to a Carnegie Endowment study, Tunisia became a major transit point in 2023. Sub-Saharan Africans in Tunisia surpassed locals as the largest group living for Europe.
Yes, and states in the Maghreb, that is Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, are shifting more towards security-first policies, responding to public pressure. Take, for example, in February 2023, President Kais Saied publicly claimed that sub-Saharan migrants were part of a criminal scheme to tamper with Tunisia's demographic composition. After that speech, life for sub-Saharan migrants deteriorated sharply. More arrests, evictions, violence in cities like Sifax. For example, in Sifax, locals rioted, burned shelters, attacked migrants, citing crime and resource stress. The rhetoric from the top legitimized those actions.
And as of July 2024, Tunisia hosts about 18,000 registered refugees or asylum seekers. And these populations were mostly from sub-Saharan and other countries. In April 2025, the Tunisia government dismantled camps housing approximately 7,000 sub-Saharan migrants, and they also began deportation. Reports indicate that migrants are being burst out into the deserts near Libya or Algeria with no supplies. Human Rights Watch argues that Tunisia fails to meet criteria of a safe third country, especially for Black Africans facing abuse.
Let me tell you another personal account. Okay. There's this one I got to hear from, I would not want to reveal source. And he said, the person told me that they kicked them out of their makeshift homes at dawn. Their clothes, documents, food, everything destroyed. And they dropped them near the border with Libya. They walked and walked, hungry, thirsty, and in their minds, Europe looked closer. But in reality, the distance felt infinite. Also, economic tensions plays a very crucial role. Studies like that of Giga show that sub-Saharan immigrants had measurable negative impact on average earnings in micro business sectors in Tunisia between 2011 and 2014, and in sectors like retail and food service.
Politicians use exactly that kind of economic data, often selectively to justify stricter controls. They say, see, they are undercutting wages, but they omit the benefits, right? Benefits like remittances, jobs, entrepreneurship, filling labor gaps. Plus, many migrants in Tunisia don't even trust NGOs due to abuse and broken promises. A recent survey found 85% of sub-Saharan migrants arrived overland, and many mistrust aid groups.
And Tunisia has incentives to present itself as a frontier state to Europe. It receives funding, equipment, diplomatic support, and all of that. The EU-Tunisia migration agreement is controversial precisely because it binds Tunisia to cut departures in exchange for aid. That complicity makes Tunisia complicit in migration enforcement and sometimes in human rights violations, according to Amnesty International.
So, you have a state that used to serve as a transit hub, now acting as a gatekeeper, pushing migrants out, sometimes violently, while blaming them for instability. And in the middle of all of that, migrants are trapped, they can't go forward, can't go home, and live in constant fear. That's something really sad to even think about or even experience. So let's briefly contrast Spain or the Mediterranean route next. Spain is a major European entry point via the Canary Islands or the Strait of Gibraltar or by boat from North Africa.
That's right, In 2023, a specific surge on the Atlantic route, that is from West Africa through Canary Islands, became a key regular pathway for African migrants. Boats often depart from Morocco, Mauritania, Senegal, via Libya, Tunisia. The risks are extreme. Overcrowded boats, unpredictable sea conditions, human trafficking networks. Spain also deals with enclaves like Ceuta and Melilla on Morocco's border, where migrants attempt to scale barriers, suffer pushbacks, or get trapped in detention camps. Political rhetoric in Spain often frames these migrants as wave after wave, even though many are asylum seekers or fleeing crisis.
Now, let's shift to the diaspora, right? Africans living in Europe, North America, and the Middle East. Their experiences of being scapegoated are different in flavor, but often familiar in structure. One anchor is the European Agency for Fundamental Rights, Being Black in the EU reports. In 13 European countries, survey respondents of African descent reported that 34% experienced racial discrimination. Let's pause and reflect, right, Mubarak? What patterns do we actually see across these cases? Migrants often occupy economically vulnerable social marginal roles, making them easier to scapegoat. Scapegoating is really about factual threats. It's about managing public anger, fears, and inequalities. Yes, add one more. Scapegoating doesn't just harm migrants, it corrodes social trust, deepens segregation, alienates talent, drains moral capital, right? It is self-inflicted wound for the societies that practices it.
Well, what you're hearing now are not anomalies, okay? They are echoes of a system that demands a scapegoat. Before we move to opportunities and solutions, let's take a breath and stretch our minds. Stay with us as we share some trending investment news across Africa. Looking at the late 2024 and early 2025, what are the three major themes driving capital across the continent?
Well, the landscape is actually dynamic, right? We're looking at fintech dominance as tech funding diversifies in early 25. Secondly, there's a massive surge in green energy capital, right? There's been a huge commitment to infrastructure and mining in West Africa. And the quite but powerful acceleration of the FTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, right? We have concrete progress from an unexpected angle in that area. So, we know the big four are still leading, Mubarak, but is the money sticking only to payments and lending?
Well, not anymore. While fintech remains the largest single sector, capturing about 45% of funding in the first 3 quarters of 2025, capital is actively diversifying, okay? According to Digital Africa, in January 2025, African startup raised an impressive $289 million, a huge jump from the previous year. And the top deals were across new frontiers. Let me give some specific examples of this diversification, okay? Take, for example, Kenya's PowerGen, which secured $50 million in January to scale distributed renewable energy solutions and clean tech. Also, we can see the rising interest in EdTech and AI with Egypt and co-education, which attracted about $24 million. And in September 2025, Intella raised $12.5 million for Arabic language AI models. These are proving that specialized local solutions are increasingly becoming bankable.
That's right. And the overall trend for 2025, right, the year-to-date total as at September 2025, it's $2.2 billion, placing Africa on track for one of its strongest funding performances on record. Shifting to hard assets, infrastructure and natural resources is something that has been coming up a lot on the headlines. We heard about the massive Ras El Ikma project in Egypt, but things are also happening in West Africa too, right? The big news is coming from Nigeria. The government has allocated 1 trillion naira in the 2025 federal budget to revitalize its mining sector. This is the largest investment in the country's mining history and signals a decisive political shift away from a near total reliance on oil. Right, the investment is targeting high demand energy transition minerals like lithium, gold, and iron ore.
That's President Tinubu speaking in October 2025. He framed the investment as a strategic one that would, improve job industrialization and innovation, which is aimed at building a post-oil globally competitive Nigeria. The commitment alongside incentives like tax holiday is designed to attract FDI and develop local processing capabilities. Beyond that, we've also seen regional infrastructures picking up. Major projects like the Lobito Corridor are also attracting billions, including a $4 billion from the US to link mineral-rich inland areas to ports, primarily benefiting the DRC, the Zambia, and Angola, while also prioritizing private capital for regional integration. Finally, On the AFCFTA, we know the continent is signing, protocols, but real implementations can be slow. Great news here. And there's also a notable progress even reaching the subnational level. Because in October, Oyo State in Nigeria launched its own AFCFTA subnational implementation strategy.
A state level strategy is a huge milestone, right? And it's quite significant. You might want to ask why, right? It's because it positions the state as the first subnational entity, not just in Nigeria, but in the entire continent, to directly engage in the AFCFTA framework, using the agreement to leverage its own infrastructure investments, right? Like the upgraded Ibadan airport. This demonstrates local government taking ownership of continental trade to unlock prosperity and create employment at the grassroots level. Separately, Ethiopia formally launched its national AFCFTA implementation with first commercial shipment of meat and agricultural products destined for other African markets.
Well, did I mention that I was at the launch of the Oyo State AFCFTA subnational implementation strategy? And it was a beautiful insight to watch. I mean, seeing the governor, Engineer Sheyi Makinde, describing the potential of the subnational level implementation strategy. And, I believe that's a good thing to watch as a first state to launch a subnational implementation strategy. And that's a wrap on the investment news. The point is to align this information with your ideas and investments. So if you've joined us since the beginning of this episode or just tuning in, we had a really interesting conversation on how Africans migrating abroad, or within the continent become political scapegoats, whether through rhetoric, policies, violence, exclusion, and also media framing. Next, we'll move into policy responses, advocacy strategies, integration models, and how African at homes and abroad can, push back the narratives.
Okay, guys, let's start at the most human level. The migrants and their neighbors. What tools do they possess? This is a domain of personal impact, about building resilience and empathy from the ground up. The primary effort here is actually storytelling. Migrants should share their personal narratives, right, to counter the monolithic negative stereotype often peddled by the media. Coupled with this is local advocacy, which involves creating mutual support networks like business alliances or neighborhood watch groups that visibly demonstrate a migrant's integration and contribution. These local networks will help build bridges of familiarity and trust, making it difficult for locals to view the migrant neighbors as an abstract threat. Right? One inspiring case is something that happened in Barcelona, where a group of African migrants founded a Migrant Voices Collective, right, which partners with local Spanish youth to tell joint stories of migration, identity, and belonging. These kind of efforts are quite slow, but often under-resourced and vulnerable to pushback, but they plant seeds of empathy and trust.
Moving to the next layer, we look at the organized response. The institution tasked with defending rights and shaping public opinion. Civil society acts as the essential advocacy engine, providing the necessary infrastructure for resistance. Their actions are more formalized and strategic, beginning with counter-speech through public awareness campaign that directly challenge false prejudicial narratives and present factual economic or social data. They also provide critical support via legal aid and defense, offering pro bono services to migrants facing detention or deportation, thereby ensuring due process and strategically challenging discriminatory policies in court. Finally, they engage in public campaigns, mobilizing large-scale actions, for example, marches, petition, and coordinated media releases to keep the pressure squarely on political figures and corporations.
One good model that has worked there, right, is something called the European Network that documents border violence and supports litigation in European courts. Also, in Nigeria and Ghana, diaspora-led NGOs run Know Your Rights campaign for prospective migrants, educating them on legal migration pathways, risk of smuggling, and how to protect their rights abroad. Right in the South Africa, also platforms like Ground Up and News 24 have run long-form series exposing how xenophobia is stoked by political rhetorics. But yeah, pitfalls also exist, right? Weird donor funding cycles, safety of activists, censorship, co-optation, and risk of massive fatigues may occur. Now to policies, yeah. Governments in origin, transit, and destination states have the heaviest lifting.
That's right, Awa. The ultimate goal of much of this advocacy is to influence the most powerful actor, and that's the state. This is where the political will must translate into tangible protections. The state responsibility is to establish a truly protective legal and political framework. This involves enacting or strengthening protecting laws like anti-discrimination and hate speech legislation that specifically cover migrants and critically prosecuting those who incite violence. You mentioned that countries or governments have much lifting to do, whether country of origin, the transit country, or destination country. Governments must ensure that they provide policies, most especially laws like anti-discrimination and hate speech, to punish those who incite violence. If this is paired with robust integration policies, which moves beyond mere tolerance, to proactive measures such as providing accessible language training, professional education, and clear pathway to citizenship, everything would work smooth. Finally, through bilateral and domestic agreement, government can create clear humane mechanisms for legal migration, family reunification, and addressing the root cause of irregular migration through development rather than purely punitive measures.
So, from all we've said, right, it's good to note that no country operates in a vacuum. Migration is transnational, right? So regional and international frameworks actually matter. The challenge has always been in balancing sovereignty, security, and right. Mubarak, a comprehensive response to scapegoating must include economic stability, right? And the best way to silence critics is to demonstrate that migrants actually drive growth. So the question now is, where exactly are the most compelling investment opportunities linked to this whole migrant and diaspora economy, and how can investors navigate the inherent risk?
You see, the migration phenomenon is far from being a liability, and it presents several highly investable opportunities, okay? Especially when we consider the $53 billion remittances flowing into Africa alone annually. Alongside the skills and entrepreneurial drive of the diaspora, the primary opportunity remains in the backbone of migrant finance. Investing in low-cost, instant cross-border payment platforms directly addresses the high cost of sending money home, often exceeding $15 per $100. Platforms that partner with formal financial institutions, helping migrants move money from the informal to the formal economy, offer high scalability. Also, services that turn remittances into investment capital, take for example fractional ownership of real estate or local mutual funds, are also imagined as RE ventures.
That's a brilliant take, right? We could also look into diaspora-driven small and medium enterprises, SMEs, right? Migrant entrepreneurs often feel niche gaps left by larger local firms, particularly in value-added manufacturing, logistics, and specialized agriculture. Investors would like to target diaspora-led funds or incubators that focus on early-stage SMEs, which benefit from the founders' global knowledge, access to international supply chains, and commitment to local community development. This supports job creation and counters the narrative that migrants are a burden.
While we might have talked about investment opportunities, the opportunities are very clear. But let me remind you that the risks are also often magnified in politically sensitive sectors like migration. So, what are the pitfalls you need to avoid as an investor? Firstly, many African economies face significant currency fluctuations and rapid changes in regulation, particularly concerning financial services and cross-border trade. Okay, investors, you must insist on strong local partnership that provide market intelligence. You should prioritize deals that often offers natural currency hedging, such as those that generate local revenue while minimizing reliance on imported inputs or utilize venture debt in stable foreign currency.
That's right, guys. And one more thing is that you should be wary, right, of falling for the migration trap. Investing in projects that are perceived as exploiting migrants or profiting from their distress can lead to significant brand damage and civil society pushback. To avoid this, adopt clear environmental, social, and governance criteria. Prioritize investment that involve genuine local community benefits and offer transparency regarding labor practices. For instance, any investment in border management technology must be carefully vetted against human rights principles.
To add to everything we've said, guys, scapegoating often intensifies during election cycles. During election cycles, you see policy shifts, asset seizures, or even forced localization. So as investors, you need to secure political risk insurance where appropriate, and also try and diversify your portfolio across multiple jurisdictions. Furthermore, engaging in constructive dialogue with local authorities and funding pro-integration research help to create a more stable investor-friendly policy environment over time. In essence, I would say that the best investment linked to migration are those that not only generate profit, but also actively demonstrate the positive economic contribution of migrants, turning the narrative of liability into one of growth and resilience. Precisely, investment must be both profitable and purpose-driven to succeed in this complex, high-impact space. So I'll ask our others, from what you've heard so far, what is the single most promising lever for change?
I believe it's narrative, right? Changing the story. Because even the most progressive policies will falter if the public perceives migrants as threats. So, storytelling, media, art, and voices for migrants themselves must reshape the lens. Of course, policy and legal structures must back that up, but narrative is the first battlefield. So, guys, we've actually walked a long path together. Let me pull out 5 key takeaways. Firstly, scapegoating is a political tool, not a reflection of truth. It gains traction when societies face inequality, fear, or institutional failure. Also, migration is complex, right? Most movement is intra-African. Many migrants move legally for family, education, work, or other reasons. Simplistic invasion frames are very misleading. And when migrants speak for themselves, the narratives crack, so voices matters. Fourth point that you need to take is that policy plus empathy must go hand in hand. And lastly, solidarity is the antidote across countries, communities, and diasporas.
I quite agree with you on narrative and storytelling, changing narrative and changing the story. From the point of view or from a communication specialist experience, I would say that if we are to change these scapegoating narratives, Africans, we need to deploy more of a behavioral change campaign strategy. Over time, when we start telling our stories from the angle we want it to be told over and over again, it becomes the truth. Okay, so here's what you that you're listening can do. Okay, listen to and amplify migrant voices. Share stories, not just headlines. Okay, support or volunteer with migrant rights organizations in your community. Push media outlets to be fair, fact-based, and human-centered. Educate yourself, read reports, follow independent journalism. Migrants are not scapegoats by accident. They are singled out because they embody contradictions. They are needed, yet they are being feared. Mobile, yet insecure. Visible, and also voiceless. So if you want to replace fear with respect, exclusion with belonging, scapegoating must be seen for what it is, a strategy of discord, not a reality.
But I must say that's quite profound, right? And I've also learned from that. I believe the listeners will also, pick one or two from all you've said, right? So guys, that's all the time we have on today's episode on the Invest Africa Group podcast. Thank you for joining us for this long journey. If this episode moved you like it has moved us, please share wildly, leave a feedback, and send us your stories.
And also you can find us on all social media platforms at the Invest Africa Group podcast. Use the hashtag Invest Africa Group podcast. And like I would always say, stay curious, stay compassionate, and above all, stay invested in Africa's story. Goodbye for now. My name remains Mubarak Abimbola.
Bye for now.
You are African.